Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
True crime with a dash of the paranormal, the garish, the strange, and the darkly comic. I'm Zevon Odelberg, and you've found your way to Kinda Murdery, a place that means more than just murder. It's my very own pocket dimension, home to a curated collection of bizarre and compelling stories. The unsolved, the unsettling, and the unbelievable. I cover it all, just so long as it's kinda murdery. Hello everyone, and welcome to this Sunday edition of Kinda Murdery. I'm your host, Zevon Odelberg. Thank you for deciding to be here. Tonight we continue with part 2 of the magic bullet murder of Rheta Wynkoop. If you haven't heard part 1 yet, before you continue listening to this episode, go back and listen to The Magic Bullet Murder of Rheta Wynkoop Part 1, released on Thursday, July 28, 2022. Before we jump in, I wanted to offer some brief background on Dr. Alice Wynekoop. It's background that I withheld in Part 1, but that I think it's important I share with you now. Hopefully, the reasons for that will become clear. Dr. Wynekoop was a prominent figure in the early decades of the 20th century. She was a mother to 4 children, at least one of whom she loved not wisely, but too well. And she was, among other things, described by the Chicago Tribune as prominent in feminist movements. She was a member of the Chicago Political Equality League and the Illinois Equal Suffrage League. That all sounds well and good, of course, but Dr. Wynekoop also held some highly questionable, to put it mildly, beliefs. She was the chairman of the eugenics department for the National Congress of Mothers and Parent-Teacher Association. Yikes. We'll return to this particular topic and what, if any, bearing it has on our murder mystery near the end of the show today. But for now, it's time to dive into part 2 of the magic bullet murder of Rheta Wynkoop. One quick note, I'm going to rewind the story approximately 1 minute to allow everyone to reorient in the narrative and catch up. If you feel like you're already caught up, feel free to fast forward. The police are currently interviewing Dr. Alice Wynkoop in her home. Here we go. Discovery that the police suspected her son of having guilty knowledge of the killing was not the only shock for Dr. Wynkoop. Working swiftly, efficiently, detectives had learned that after leaving Chicago for the West on Friday, Earl and Stanley Young had experienced car trouble a few miles outside of Chicago. They had returned that same afternoon and had remained in the city until Tuesday morning, the day of the killing, before starting out again. But Earl had not gone to his home. They sprang it on Dr. Wynkoop unexpectedly and taxed her with having seen her son over the weekend and having written what they continued to call the love letter after seeing him on Sunday. In admitting that she had seen Earl and without his wife's knowledge, Dr. Wynkoop also said that she had seen him on Monday night, that he had telephoned her to meet him at 67 and Kedzie Streets, several miles from her home, and that she had gone there by streetcar, and they sat for at least 2 hours in his car and talked. "Well, why did he not come home and talk to you there?" she was asked. Dr. Wynkoop had an elaborate explanation. Earl was a sensitive soul. He felt the neighbors were inclined to jeer at him because he appeared to be a misfit in whatever he did. He had hoped to show them by making a success of the Western trip that he was misjudged. To have been compelled to face them again so soon after his departure, fearing they would not believe car trouble was responsible for his return, would have greatly humiliated him, she insisted. So, in the joy of having another opportunity to see him, she gladly made the long, weary trip to the meeting place he had named. "And what did you talk about?" "Oh, just the sort of things a mother and son would talk about," Dr. Wynkoop said, but she refused to go into details. "All right, well, perhaps Earl will talk more freely," she was told. "The police in Kansas City have been asked to arrest him and Stanley Young." With that thought to muse upon, they left Dr. Wynkoop to herself again for the time being. The reprieve from questioning did not last long, however. From Doctors J.J. Kearns and Thomas L. Dwyer of the coroner's staff, who had made a superficial examination of Rhetta's body, came the startling disclosure that the tiny abrasions upon her face near the mouth were a combination of bruises and burns. "Indications are," the physician reported, "that the girl was under an anesthetic when she was shot. It might be well to look for evidence to support that belief." Dr. Wynekoop was taken back to her basement office. Calmly, she pointed out to the police what she knew they were seeking: a gauze anesthetic mask and an empty chloroform bottle. "If Rheta was under an anesthetic, those probably were used. I don't recall having given an anesthetic down here recently, and I don't recall having seen a mask or an empty bottle about." The police carried off mask and bottle, and along with them ashes found in a porcelain container to which they chose to attach possible importance. And for a good reason. In contrast to the generally dusty condition of the entire house, the floor of the room in which Rheta's body had been found was strikingly clean. The ashes, police believed, might have resulted from the burning of rags which would have been used to wash up blood which assuredly would have flown from the fatal wound, unless, as had been suggested, all the bleeding had been internal. "Someone in this household holds the key to this murder," declared Captain Steig in the early morning hours. Early on Wednesday, a new note was injected into the investigation with the arrival from Indianapolis of Bernardine H. Gardner, father of Rheta Wynkoop. He went at once to the Wynekoop home, where he was permitted to talk to Dr. Wynkoop in private. He left her in a state of high indignation. "The Wynekoops have been trying to prepare me for this for months," he charged flatly. "Dr. Wynkoop has repeatedly written and telephoned me that Rheta's health was precarious and asked me to send money for her care, although the few letters I received from my daughter invariably were cheery until, after a silence of 4 months, she wrote a short letter that made me suspect she was not happy. Today, as soon as we were alone, Dr. Wynkoop told me, 'Don't talk too much to the police. When you do, be sure to tell them that your daughter had not been well, and that she had been ill considerably of late, and don't forget to tell them that her mother died of tuberculosis,' which is a lie, because her mother died in an asylum. I'm frank to say I don't know why she gave me such strange advice, and I believe it is all part of a plot to hide the truth. I think the Wynekoops know who killed Rheta, and why." Meanwhile, a quiet search was being conducted for John Van Pelt, the odd jobs man around the Wynekoop home. He was found in the home of Walker Wynekoop in Glencoe, but satisfied police that he knew little of what went on above his boiler room home in the old house, and that, moreover, he had not been in Chicago since November 11th, 10 days before the murder, when Dr. Wynekoop arranged for him to do considerable work in her son's suburban home. Shortly afterward, Coroner Frank Walsh opened an inquest. Among others, Dr. Wynekoop was called to the stand. She answered half a dozen questions when Coroner Walsh quietly asked, "How much insurance, if any, did your daughter-in-law carry?" "I know that she had no insurance," was the reply. "This inquest is adjourned," declared the coroner abruptly. Pressed by reporters, he made a sensational revelation. "There would be no sense in going ahead if Dr. Wynekoop intends to lie," he declared. "She has said that Rheta carries no insurance. As a matter of fact, she carried 2 policies, one for $5,000 and another for $1,000, and carrying double indemnity for death by violence. Both were payable to Dr. Wynekoop as beneficiary, both were taken out within 3 weeks of the murder, and Dr. Wynekoop paid all the premiums." The coroner also revealed that Dr. Wynekoop previously had applied for a $10,000 double indemnity policy on Rheta's life, which had been rejected by the company, and which had aroused such resentment in the physician's breast that she had written the company vitriolic protests, in which she said that Rheta's health was perfect and that there was no reason for rejecting the application. And at the same time, she was writing and telephoning Rheta's father that the girl's health was bad and her death was likely to occur at any moment, he pointed out. Angered by this evidence that Dr. Wynekoop had told another untruth, Captain Steig ordered her and the other members of her household taken to Fillmore Street Station for more questioning. Late that night, they were released under orders to return home and stay there. The policemen were placed on guard to see that the order was obeyed. It was one of these policemen who, the following morning, took Earl Wynekoop into custody as, carrying a suitcase, he dashed up to the house. Eluding Kansas City police, he had boarded a train for Chicago, left it at a suburban station, and made his way home without being recognized. The tall, nattily-dressed youth with a marked resemblance to old Dr. Wynekoop was rushed by detectives to the morgue and confronted with his wife's body. The scene was singularly devoid of drama. Young Wynekoop steeled himself as a detective whisked off the sheet which concealed the face of the murdered girl. He shook his head as he bent over for a long, lingering look at his wife. Then he swung around and said hoarsely, "Let's go." At the police station, he was questioned by Captain Stegan Duffy and Assistant State's Attorney John M. Long. "I certainly did not kill my wife. I do not know who did," Wynekoop said. Presently, however, he was telling police that his love for his wife had vanished within a few months after their marriage. "She was my mental inferior," he declared. He was admitting, too, that he had a sweetheart. He named her Priscilla Whittle, 23 years old, employed as a salesgirl in a downtown store. Whisked from behind the counter into the maelstrom of a bizarre murder mystery, the diminutive redhead Priscilla seemed eager enough to talk. "I met Earl about a year ago, and we've been sweethearts ever since," she said. "We were not engaged, but it was understood between us that we were to marry. He saw me Monday night before he left on his trip to the West, and he promised to write regularly and said he would be in a position to marry me when he got back. I thought it was a question of money because I did not know until I read it in the papers about the murder that he was a married man. Of course, I don't know anything about his wife's death." Earl did not deny that Priscilla's charms had something to do with his return after he had made a start for the West. "Was it because you wanted to be with her that you didn't let your wife know you'd come back?" "Partly," he admitted. "On the other hand, Rheta was intensely emotional. She was quite capable of making a scene when I tried to leave for the West again, and I don't like scenes." "Your mother gave another reason. She said you feared the jibes of the neighbors." Earl shrugged that off. "Well, that's also figured," he said, "and Mother must have guessed it. I didn't tell her so." Priscilla Whittle's claims to Earl's affections went unchallenged only until the next edition of the newspaper was on the street. Then, an irate young woman, Margaret McHale, appeared with the counterclaim that she was the girl that Earl Wynekoop intended to marry. "I met him at the World's Fair when we were both working," she said. "He proposed to me 7 times before I accepted him. Then he gave me a diamond ring. I never knew until today that he was Earl Wynekoop. He told me his name was Michael Wynekoop. He took me to his home once and introduced me to his mother as the only girl he had ever loved, and I showed her my engagement ring. Dr. Wynekoop said she liked me on sight and that she believed I was one girl really worthy of her son. I telephoned his home several times and asked for Michael, and his mother answered and called him to the telephone." Naively, the young woman told why she believed Earl really loved her. "He showed me a notebook in which he had listed the names, addresses, and telephone numbers of 50 girls, and he told me he had given them all up for me." Young Earl Wynekoop admitted the truth of her story. "I had hoped to keep her out of this," he said. "I told you about Priscilla Whittle because I knew I would have to account for my movements, and I knew you would find out I was with her the night my wife was killed. But I didn't think Margaret would be dragged into the spotlight." Police were astounded. From what they'd called her love letter to Earl, they had suspected that a stronger-than-ordinary bond existed between Dr. Wynekoop and her son. Here was proof of its strength. Not only had she forgiven and condoned his infidelity to his wife, but she had aided him in it. "Did your mother buy the diamond ring which you gave to Margaret McHale?" Earl was asked. The young man flushed. "No," he said in a low tone. "It was the ring which I gave Rheta when we became engaged. She thought she had mislaid it." Okay, can I just say that Earl Wynekoop is such a sack of crap? Not only is he serially cheating on his wife with 50-plus women, but he steals her wedding ring, then gaslights her into thinking she lost it and gives it to his new girl. Yuck. All right, back to the story. Reporters hurried to report this latest development to Dr. Wynekoop and question her about it. A queer expression crossed her face. Was it dismay? Could it be fear? "You tell Earl," she said, "that if he loves me one scratch, to keep his mouth shut." The warning, if ever it had reached Earl, would have been too late. Already under pressure, he had made damaging admissions. That he had discussed with his mother the unhappiness of his marriage to Rheta, for one thing. The religion to which the Wynekoops subscribed frowned upon divorce. He also admitted that his mother had told him she regarded his wife as a figurative millstone around his neck, standing between him and success in life, to which she believed him entitled. Entitlement certainly seems to be a key part of this story, though it remains to be seen if Earl's entitlement is the one upon which we should focus. He also had explained the mystery of 3 exploded shells and the fatal pistol. "When I had the pistol cleaned and oiled, I took Mother out to the garage and tried to teach her how to shoot it," he said. She got the hang of it, but she was awkward, and to guard against accidental discharge as much as possible, I put 3 loaded cartridges in the pistol with a discharge shell between each loaded one. And his mother had said she did not know how to fire the pistol. Earl, Captain Steeg told the harassed youth, this thing has simmered down to a question of whether you or your mother killed Rheta. It couldn't have been anyone else. At this stage, it was decided that an effort would be made to get the truth by use of a lie detector machine. Dr. Wynekoop agreed when asked if she would submit willingly to being questioned with the aid of the lie detector. Apparently, she'd heard of it, understood its working, and did not fear it. Perhaps she also knew that suffering from high blood pressure and irregular heart action, the result would not mean much, if anything. At least she betrayed no surprise when, after prolonged experiment, the operator of the machine admitted that Dr. Wynekoop's physical condition had defeated the machine. Earl Wynekoop followed her example and submitted himself to the lie detector while being questioned for more than an hour. At the end of that time, the operator told him hotly, "You've lied like hell and you know it. You know who killed your wife and you're trying to shield that person." The accusation caught young Wynekoop by surprise. I fear, he began, then shut his lips tightly. "Your mother had motive." "Yes, she didn't like Rheta," he admitted. Then, so suddenly that it took his questioners by surprise, he added, "I'm going to confess to lift suspicion from someone I dearly love." All along, the detectives had been firmly convinced that, although he was far from the scene, he had known that his wife was to be killed and when. They set themselves to have him name some person with whom he had conspired to kill his wife while he established an alibi 170 miles away, and he swept them off their feet by an entirely different story. "I killed my wife and I did it alone," he said. "When I came back to Chicago, I stayed away from home until Tuesday. Then I went out there and went into my mother's office to wait for her, hoping to see her, but not Rheta because of the scene I feared she might make. There were footsteps on the stairs. I thought it was Mother, but it was Rheta. I stepped back out of sight. She disrobed and started to weigh herself. In that moment, the antagonism between us overcame me. I seized her and threw her upon the table. There was a bottle of chloroform at hand. I forced it into her nostrils. She became unconscious. Then I remembered the pistol I'd given Mother for her protection while I was gone. I got it, and I shot Rheta. Then I left the house." Police were frankly skeptical, but they pretended to believe it and asked for details, which Earl supplied. In the end, he agreed to reenact the murder as he had said it occurred in the operating room. Out to the Wynekoop home they sped in a car, and there in the basement office, young Wynekoop put on a dramatic scene, with Detective Bert Gray taking the role of Rheta Wynkoop. It was most convincing until the moment when Earl seized the detective and lifted him onto the table. Then, "That's enough," Earl was told. "You have laid him upon the table the wrong way. Your wife's head was at the other end." I may have forgotten that," he stammered. "But the rest is true enough." Refutation already was at hand, however. Stanley Young, his companion on the trip which had ended in Kansas City with the news of Rhetta's murder, had been returned in custody as a material witness, and now was brought face to face with young Wynekoop. "Earl, you fool!" he cried. "What do you hope to gain by these lies? You didn't kill your wife. Why, I was with you almost every moment on Tuesday, and I'm going to save you in spite of anything you say." He turned to the detectives. "Take us to Joliet, and I will point out a filling station where we bought gas and made a slight repair upon the car. The attendant will remember us. Take us to Peoria. Filling station attendants there and the telegraph office from which Earl sent the telegram to his mother will not have forgotten us." A squad car took him at his word and departed on the quest of identification intended to prove young Wynekoop's confession to murder untrue. Meanwhile, delving into the financial status of Dr. Wynekoop had revealed that it was shaky. Her bank balance totaled $26. She owed $3,500 on a note which was secured by the mortgage on her home, and she was hard-pressed to pay even the smallest of current bills, although possessor of property for which there was no sale valued at $6,500. The old doctor snorted when this was mentioned. "My income runs around $8,000 a year," she said. "That is ample for my needs." She could not, however, produce corroborating evidence that her income was even a small portion of that sum. Convinced that whether she had killed her daughter-in-law or not, she at least knew who did, her questioners subjected her to a new and prolonged barrage of questions. The questioners emerged from the ordeal far more shaken than Dr. Wynekoop. "She's a woman of stone," one said. "Nothing we can say or do will shake her." They sent her to get some rest, because by that time Earl Wynekoop, His confession, discredited by positive identification of him as having been in Peoria at about the hour his wife was slain, had been returned. It was pointed out to him that a strong case of circumstantial evidence had been built up against his mother. "Your wife was killed by someone in whom she had confidence," Earl was told. "Everything backs up the theory that she disrobed of her own accord, then got on the table herself, then submitted to an anesthetic, and then was shot. Who could that someone be except your mother?" Earl ran shaking fingers through his disheveled hair. "My mother would be incapable of that," he said, but he did not say it with assurance. "Bring her here and question her in front of me, and let's get somewhere." The police agreed. They roused Dr. Wynkoop and brought her face to face with Earl. "For God's sake, Mother," cried the distracted youth. "If you did this thing because of the bond that is between us, confess it." The old doctor eyed her son calmly. "I did not kill Rheta, Earl," she said. "Then," a detective said bluntly, "Earl himself killed Rheta. It lies between you two." They took Earl away then and concentrated upon his mother. Hour after hour, her inquisitors hammered away at her with questions, and hour after hour she fought back at them with denials. In the end, it was Assistant State Attorney Long who worked an old trick upon her. When the others were severe and harsh and condemnatory, Long sympathized with her. He spoke gently and courteously and won her confidence. Night had turned into day, and noon was fast approaching, when Long said to her, "The coroner's chemist report shows there was chloroform in Rhetta's vital organs. Why don't you just admit you chloroformed her?" "All right," Dr. Wynekoop responded. "But how will I explain this part of it?" She formed her hand to imitate a gun and went through the motion of pulling the trigger. "Well, you shot her," said Long. "Well, if I did, how will I account for it?" Dr. Wynekoop parried. "Well, maybe it was the chloroform that killed her," said Long. I don't know. I want you to tell me the truth." Dr. Wynekoop stared at the wall. "Wait a minute," she requested. "Let me think." Then, "I don't know but what your idea is, all right. I'll tell you about it. Rheta," she said, "had spoken of going downtown, but complained of a pain in the pelvic region. I told her to go down to the office, undress, and get upon the table, and I would give her a treatment. I massaged her side, and it was painful to her. I suggested that a mild anesthetic might alleviate her suffering during the treatment, and she acquiesced. My mistake was to permit her to pour some of the chloroform over the anesthetizing mask. She may have dropped too much on at once and caused her death right there, for she took several deep inhalations. She grew quiet, and I found that her heart had stopped. After a hasty examination, I decided the girl was dead. I was stunned. I realized my career was at stake. Suddenly, I gave thought to the gun that was in my desk in the other room. In a flash, I decided to make it appear as though the girl had been murdered in a robbery. Getting the gun from the drawer, I held the muzzle within 5 inches of her skin and pressed the trigger. When the shot was fired, I nearly fainted from the sudden noise. My only explanation of the deed is that I was terror-stricken. I recovered my senses within a few minutes, I suppose. I realized something should be done. I wiped the gun of fingerprints and laid it near Rhetta's head. I don't remember covering it with gauze. It was just an instinctive gesture, acquired from the surgical room, I suppose. I wrapped the body decently in a blanket. Then I started upstairs. Suddenly my mind cleared, and I thought I would make the whole thing look like a robbery. I went back into my office, the waiting room, and I stole my own $6 out of the drawer. Afterward, I went upstairs, and I got my coat and hat, and I left the house. Going over to Madison Street, I walked up and down for a long time. It seemed like hours. Captain Steig asked who was in the house at the time of Rhetta's death. "No one," was Dr. Wynekoop's reply. "The house was empty except for Rheta and me." Jubilation over the confession was short-lived. The formal documents signed by Dr. Wynekoop, couched in the detached language of medical science, proved upon close scrutiny to be rather a perfect defense than an admission of murder. It was based upon the acknowledged right of a physician to administer an anesthetic, and in not one word was there an admission of an intention of killing her daughter-in-law. Nevertheless, before the resumed coroner's inquest that afternoon, Dr. Wynekoop insisted against the advice of her attorney upon taking the stand and repeating her confession. She was ordered held to the grand jury on a charge of murder. Almost simultaneously, the coroner's office made its official report of the autopsy upon Rhetta's body. And that report was a terrific blow to Dr. Wynekoop's defense confession. Blood had been found in Rheta's chest cavity. This proved that she was not dead when she was shot. Dr. Wynekoop learned of it in her cell an hour later. Promptly, she repudiated her statement and denied any knowledge of how Rheta had come to her death. "I was trying to save someone else," she said, obviously meaning Earl. Her attorney, Frank Tyrrell, was more elaborate. Dr. Wynekoop told the story she did because it was suggested to her after almost 70 hours of brutal questioning by the police. There's not a word of truth in it. Indictment swiftly followed the grand jury's recommendation, and on January 11, 1934, Dr. Alice Wynekoop went on trial for her life in criminal court before Judge Joseph B. David. Outlining the case for the state, prosecutor Charles S. Dougherty declared that Dr. Wynekoop regarded her daughter-in-law as a drag upon her husband Earl, and that, not believing in divorce, she had sought to remove that drag by murder. At the same time, she saw an opportunity to lift her pressing financial difficulties by insuring Rheta and making herself the beneficiary, thus collecting when the girl was dead. It was charged that she had carefully paved the way for the murder by arranging for Van Pelt, the odd jobs man, to be given work at the home of her son Walker Wynekoop, by asking Enid Hennessy to go downtown on an errand rather than coming home directly from the classes she taught, and by sending Rheta to do her marketing much earlier than usual, in order that after she was killed there would be ample time to do anything necessary to wipe out the evidence that Dr. Wynekoop was the slayer. The defense, on its part, offered in its opening statement the same story that Dr. Wynekoop originally told Ahern the Undertaker and later told police of finding Rheta slain by some unknown person. The battle centered around introduction as evidence of Dr. Wynekoop's confession, and on the sixth day, Judge David admitted it, ruling that it was not a confession at all, but in fact, an exculpation. Up to that time, Dr. Wynekoop had withstood stoically in sight of her dead daughter-in-law's garments, the table upon which she had died, the chloroform mask, the fatal pistol, the blanket with which the girl had been covered. She had withstood all of these. She also had pleaded attacks of illness and was frequently out of court and spent virtually all of her time in the county jail hospital. But the ruling, admitting the confession, unnerved her. A great shock was to follow its introduction. Dr. Harry Hoffman, a psychologist attached to the jail, had taken the stand to describe the circumstances under which Dr. Wynekoop made her statement, he having been present throughout a great part of her examination. "When Dr. Wynekoop admitted responsibility for Rheta's death, her story shocked me. As an old friend of her dead husband, long acquainted with her and her family, I was absolutely thunderstruck. I said to her, 'Well, why did you do it?' And she replied, 'I did it to save the poor dear.'" As the meaning which Dr. Hoffman attached to that reply penetrated Dr. Wynekoop's consciousness, she started up from her chair, gave a little gasp, and collapsed. Later on her cot in the hospital, she issued a statement. "When Dr. Hoffman asked me why I did it, I believed he was asking me why I had confessed, and my reply meant that I had taken the blame to save Earl from the torture of further questioning. I did not mean, as Dr. Hoffman implied, that I had killed Rheta to save Earl from further unhappiness in being married to her." 4 days later, Dr. Wynekoop was officially declared too ill to return to court, and Judge David withdrew a juror and declared it a mistrial. "When she recovers, Dr. Alice Wynekoop will be placed on trial again and sent to the electric chair," declared the state's attorney's office. "Dr. Wynekoop will never live to face another court," her attorney asserted just as emphatically. Did Dr. Wynekoop kill her daughter-in-law? Or was she the victim of a damning chain of circumstantial evidence? A chain which she helped to forge herself through her anxiety to spare her son Earl, with whom she held a bond that far outstripped ordinary motherly love in its intensity? That is the question. At any rate, after 2 trials, the first declared a mistrial due to Dr. Wynekoop's failing health, Dr. Alice Wynekoop was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The motive was ultimately attributed to financial pressures and her motherly protection of her son Earl, who was miserable in the marriage. She was incarcerated for 14 years at the Oakdale Reformatory for Women in Dwight, Illinois, where, in a later news article on the prison, she was described as the matriarch, a sick, tired old woman who did a great deal of knitting for the soldiers during World War II. She was released on December 29, 1947 for good behavior. After a brief hospitalization, she was moved to Burnside Rest Home in Chicago, where she lived anonymously and died at the age of 84 on July 4th, 1955. But before I say goodbye to you and to this story of Dr. Alice Wynkoop and a mother who loved not wisely but too well, I'd like to take a moment to talk a little bit more, not just about motive, but also the mentality required to commit a cold-blooded murder. I'd hardly be the first to point out that the devaluing of the victim's life, the denial of their basic humanity, is often key to a murderer's ability to kill. I'd also like to offer a warning here. There are some upsetting topics coming up regarding both race, racism, and abortion. And while that may suddenly seem like it's coming out of left field, I assure you it is not. Obviously, I'd just as soon not touch on such hot-button, perilous culture war topics as race and abortion, but rest assured, I'm not doing so to fan the flames of anger and division, but rather because these subjects are inextricable from a clear understanding of Dr. Alice Wynkoop's psychology. As I mentioned at the top, Dr. Wynekoop was a eugenicist, and eugenics too are inextricably linked with both racism and abortion. Now, if you'd rather skip this bit, hit fast forward a couple times right now, but if you, like me, are still unsatisfied with what the story has offered, not in terms of why Dr. Wynekoop would kill, but also in terms of how she was able to convince herself that murder was a righteous path, then stay tuned. All right, well, fair warning, here we go. Some of you may be familiar, hopefully most of you are not, with the term race suicide. Among white supremacist movements, the alt-right movement, and even certain extremist factions of the anti-abortion movement, the term race suicide has been used to describe a host of supposedly existential crises facing the future of white people in America. From falling birth rates to interracial relationships, interracial children, and yes, abortion. Although the term, ugly as it is, can encompass all of these things and be used as a rallying cry for white supremacists the world over, at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, it was often used and printed in newspapers as a stand-in, a code word for abortion. What does this have to do with Dr. Alice Wynkoop? Well, Dr. Wynkoop, in her capacity as chairman of the eugenics department for the National Congress of Mothers, twice ignited national controversy, or at least national remark, by sharing her eugenics-based beliefs at the national meetings. In 1918, she ignited scandal when she called for an end to moral approbation towards single women who gave birth to war babies. Of course, while advocating for an end to social stigma for unwed mothers of soldiers' babies sounds like a worthy goal, the reality of this advocacy is rooted in the same deeply problematic beliefs that led to Nazi Germany's Lebensborn, or Font of Life program, where young German women of, quote, desirable, unquote, social and ethnic backgrounds were encouraged to bear the children of SS officers. With slightly less specificity, a Lebensborn program was precisely what Dr. Wynkoop was advocating for, but her support for a Lebensborn program in 1918 was not the first time she had created an uproar. 6 years earlier, Dr. Wynkoop sparked national outrage with her comments on race suicide. As I mentioned a moment ago, even though its implications go far beyond abortion, at that point in American history, race suicide was often used as a substitute for the word abortion without necessarily always containing all the same ugly racial beliefs that it does today. Clearly to us now, all those ugly beliefs are obviously inherent and intrinsic and inextricable from such a blunt label. But in her 1912 comments, Dr. Wynkoop seems to substitute class for race, and while she caused much outrage, she surprisingly caused little confusion. Here's the headline, and I quote, "Race suicide of the idle rich will not hurt the race." And here are Dr. Wynkoop's actual comments. Race suicide is widely practiced, especially among the so-called better classes or near society women. This is not to be deplored because the reproduction of their kind would not benefit society. There are too many of them already. In other words, she's quite literally saying, we shouldn't be concerned when rich women abort their babies because we've got too many rich women already. Dr. Wynekoop seems to be changing the slogan, eat the rich, to abort the rich. And as absurd as that sounds, there's no levity in my description here. This is actually what she said and what she meant. In today's world, there are hardly two more perilous or hot-button topics to publicly discuss than racism and abortion, so why in the world did I bring us here? It was definitely not with the intent of alienating or upsetting anyone, nor do I desire to create clickbait. I felt this aspect of Dr. Wynekoop's story needed to be explored because it reveals an important insight into her murderer's mind. Sociopaths often fail to recognize the humanity, the intrinsic inherent value of their victims' lives. Well, Alice Wynekoop, herself from a society wealthy family, was convicted of murdering Rheta Wynkoop, her own daughter-in-law. And by her own confession, she did it to free her beloved son from an unhappy marriage. So the question that arises is, did Dr. Alice Wynekoop's belief in the importance of desirable breeding, which feels yucky to just say out loud, but that's the thought, the importance of desirable breeding, which inherently overvalues men, coupled with, no pun intended, I promise, her belief in the uselessness of idly wealthy women, allow her to easily justify murdering her own daughter-in-law? Perhaps, or even probably, yes, it did, because in doing so, she was, after all, freeing her beloved son to propagate the species with another, in her estimation, more valuable partner, and because the life she was taking belonged, according to her own assertions, to a person whose identity made her, quote, of no benefit to society, unquote. Again, it seems that the answer to that question is yes. And to that, I say, yikes. Don't look to murderers for moral direction. Or if you find somebody with absolutely hideously confused morals, perhaps don't be too surprised when they wind up being a murderer. I'm Zevon Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery. If you've enjoyed today's Kinda Murdery, please tell your friends and family. Tell strangers. Leave a review. It's the best way to ensure that I can keep telling that special brand of bizarre and terrible tales that you'll only find here on Kinda Murdery.